we have to get past this notional idea that Agile is just about empowering teams and just letting the teams figure it out. I don't think that it was ever like, oh, okay, we're going to self-organize a complex system at scale, or we're going to self-organize refactoring, a complex thing at scale with no design intent or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like, yes, I just think we're just in a funny place. It's like where everything is still possible and everything's still out in front of us. But I think the Agile community in some ways has kind of worked its way into a corner.
Hey, this is Dave Prior. Welcome to Leading Agile SoundNotes. Mike Cottmeyer is back. Mike, thank you for taking time out of your morning.
What's up, Dave? How you doing, man? Thanks for having me always.
I'm good. I have no idea what we're going to talk about, though. So I'm a little bit...
I'm going to interview you this morning.
Okay.
So,
I'm ready.
It's super cool, right? So, just for everybody's, edification, it's kind of funny. Dave and I are actually getting into a pretty solid routine of, we're really trying to do one of these once a week, right? There's just so much to talk about that hasn't been talked about over the last couple of years. And it's so sometimes Dave will come to me with topics. Sometimes I'll come with Dave with topics. And so I sent Dave a topic brief earlier this morning for what I want to talk about. And I said, I'm going to interview you instead of you interviewing me. So we'll actually get started. I have a question for you to start with, but then we will see where it goes, right?
Okay.
So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, right, is I was up in Raleigh a couple weeks ago at the Tri-Agile conference, and I was doing a talk on how to create a culture of agility, right? And kind of my general bent, right? I believe that you got to get the teaming strategies, then you got to get the practices, and then culture kind of emerges within that, right? It gets into the whole thing we talk about all the time: teams, backlogs, working, tested software. And the very first time I introduced the idea of teams, backlogs, working, tested software was at a Scrum gathering Daniel Gullo had invited me to, and 500 people in the room. He'd packed the room out for me. It was super cool, And I asked people, right? I mean, we all know Scrum kind of requires 5 to 7, 6 to 8, whatever the rule is.
10 or less now, officially.
What is that?
10 or less. Officially now, it's 10 or less.
10 or less. Okay, cool. Yeah, just rules of thumb, right, at the end of the day. And every single time I walk into a large room at an Agile conference and I describe what a team in Scrum looks like and ask people to raise their hand, I mean, how many people have teams like this? Of hundreds of people, you'll get a very small handful of people that are able to form those kinds of teams.
Yep.
And what was, and this is the thing that kind of got me thinking, and I probably have 3 or 4 other examples, both inside Leading Agile and outside of Leading Agile and LinkedIn conversations I've had, but I'll start here. Is the comments, one of the Agile coaches I've known for forever said something to the effect of well, when we go in to do Agile, we can't change how the teams are formed. And I went, if you can't change how the teams are formed, how are you ever going to make this work, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you is I got to figure that's a pretty consistent challenge, a question that you get asked in your CSM classes.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to approach that?
They don't even ask. I think that's the biggest part is they don't even ask anymore. They're just like, yeah, but I am Scrum Master / product owner / team member. Or yes, everyone on my team is on 8 different teams. Or, all those bad dysfunctional combinations. Those are the hits that never go away, like Beach Boys songs. And the people, I guess there's sort of a little bit of learned helplessness there where the people that are coming into classes now, they don't even think to challenge it. It's just this is my reality. Whereas 5 years ago, they would have been fighting against it. 10 years ago, they would have been an open rebellion.
Fascinating. That's a fascinating thing. So talk to me about that. So 10 years ago, an open rebellion. What is that? What did that look like? What do those conversations look like?
People, one of my lights went out. I'm hoping that's still okay. People back then, in the classes or in Agile in general, there was just this sense of uprising. We're going to turn the system over. We're going to make everything different. And there's waves of people that come through the classes. That wave has been gone for a while. All the revolutionaries have either become coaches or given up in despair or have gone on to Valhalla.
Well, it was called a manifesto, I think, for a reason, right? You know, it was a call to revolution, right? Yeah.
Yeah. People now don't. My impression is they don't see how they can create change. I mean, I just did a podcast for my other show about this recently, where they know things need to change at the level above them. Mm-hmm. They do not have the agency, right, to come to the person who's in charge and say, like, you've got to stop this. And so this is an unfortunate thing. And maybe you can give a good response to this since you're at a higher level in the org. My responses are like, you can do it on the side, not tell anybody. You can, hope it succeeds and then ask for permission. Or you can keep fighting a battle with people who don't even understand what you're battling against and don't care about the struggle you're having. Or you can go work somewhere else. And it's really depressing because, like, for me, that was, how I ended up going to BV and then to leading Agile was I just got tired of being at places that kept pretending they were going to do it, but not giving us what we needed to be able to do it, like stable teams.
So like, the way that we kind of approach it is that, and it's evolved from a transformation perspective as well, too, I think. It's like we've been in market for years now, even before I started leading Agile, talking about, what I'll generally refer to a lot as like first principles. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of say that, we're like a hammer looking for nails, right? So I talk about teams, backlogs, working tested software. I talk about systems first, so systems and practices and culture. We talk about transformation, and in the presence of dependencies, you have to have compensating controls. As you start to break dependencies, you can, so I feel like it's kind of funny because hopefully people notice I've been creating a lot more content lately. I kind of took a little bit of a hiatus for a few years while my wife was sick with leukemia, and she's totally recovered now. So like I've got some creative energy back to talk about these things. But as I've reconnected with the community, I'm getting out and I'm speaking more, it blows me away that we're largely in the same place psychologically that we've been for 12, 13, 20 years, something like that, right? And so like what we typically do is, we talk about first principles, about how to make it work. We've been on a kick for years now. Some of our best performing content is, we've done various revisions of it. Basically it's like why Agile fails and what you can do about it. Yeah. And, I think there's enough evidence that Agile works out there. And there's also not a credible alternative to it at this point. And so it's like people still believe and they're looking for an answer as to why they've been struggling for so long. Like we just started with a client. It should be a rather large client over the next couple of years to do a global transformation for them. And their comment to us is why we got selected is we were like the only person that they had talked to, or the only group that they had talked to that actually had a credible strategy for how to do this, right? And so there's like a couple things that have shifted, right? So we talk about this, and we've been talking about it for years. And so when people get at their wits' end, and they've tried this a couple times and they want a hypothesis. They want to know why it's been so hard. They want to know why they weren't able to just do it. And then we kind of tell them, and we actually have a credible plan for how to create teams and, do all the things that we talk about. They're willing to kind of suspend disbelief and give it a try. But I'll tell you, one of the things that we had to start doing years ago, and it's when we started doing really big transformations that were C-suite led transformations, and we had to start being able to measure progress on the transformations, and we had to start being able to economically justify the transformations.
Right.
So a lot of our conversations, it's like Agile is like you can almost have like 95% of the conversation without ever talking about agility. Right. What it is, it's like economic prioritization of initiatives, understanding what the capacity of the organization is, making sure that we're bringing capacity and demand. There's a phrase that we're talking about a lot that's called value density. And it's like, so like in any given initiative, right, we know that, probably 15, 20% of it is what's giving you most of the value. Right. So through appropriate decomposition of features and focusing on minimally viable product kinds of things, making sure that we're delivering the smallest thing that will possibly work, right? We can drive value density up. A lot of times, we're talking about how to connect to like strategic, business drivers, OKRs, KPIs, things like that. And if you can take like an organization's OKRs, understand how that maps down into the underlying business architecture, where there's constraints in the systems, how do you create a program and portfolio governance that satisfies those? And then, but at the end of the day, like the answer to all that stuff is team level agile, orchestration mechanism at the portfolio level, orchestration mechanism at the program level, small batches, decomposition, right? All the things we talk about. Yeah. But it has to be like really, really solidly connected to the economic outcomes in the company. And the other thing that we're seeing quite a bit is that the transformation work has to cost justify itself. And so, a lot of organizations are really overloaded with people doing the wrong kinds of things. Sometimes there's capitalization issues that you have to deal with. So there's just a lot of stuff. So in order for us to be able to have credible conversations, it's not just like, hey, let's do Agile, let's do Scrum, let's do Safe or whatever. It's like, let's talk about what an operating model looks like that is going to actually solve your business problems. Okay. And when you can frame it that way with the right level of people in the organization, then you're able to have those conversations. Okay. But I do think in practice, right? Kind of our strategy is I think 90% of the people, 95% of the people that probably come through your class, you're right, don't have the agency. But they can be pointers, right? And pointers to us. They can be pointers to other people, right? And then you get in, you have like a credible plan for how to do it. Yep. Right. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
So can I throw
please.
I want to throw a big wrench into everything you just said and see what happens.
Okay, cool.
I agree with everything you said. I think there's definitely a maturation in the way that they're looking at the work and trying to understand the work. Yeah. But I'm also getting this vibe from the space in general that maybe it's coming out of the pandemic or just change fatigue or whatever. But there's all those companies that are ditching Scrum Masters and switching back to a technical program manager, which is an experienced Agile transformation coach with traditional project management background and several years of software development experience who knows design thinking, which doesn't exist anywhere. Yeah. It's like they're tired of trying to they're so tired of trying to improve that they're trying to go back to like their old girlfriend. Like go back to waterfall because it's comfortable. It doesn't work, but it's comfortable.
Well, I agree with you, but it's like I think what's happening, right? So let's unpack this because I wasn't really kind of thinking about going in this direction, but I think this is a really good direction to go. Okay. So think about what's happened, right? It's like this. It's like you talked about revolutionaries, and we've had like a lot of Agile enthusiasts and things like that.
Now it's like the know-nothings.
Like the idealistic way of thinking about this is where we're going to teach people how to do Scrum. We're going to give them all the right roles. They're going to identify their impediments. The system's going to improve over time, and it's all going to be kind of rainbows and butterflies. Yeah. And I'm not saying that can't work. I'm just saying that in practice it often doesn't. Right? So what I think companies are trying to do is that they're not seeking the ideal anymore. Right? They're not
just
seeking
good enough.
Like but like, so you think about it, it's a little bit like what we talked about with the Safe podcast that we did. It's like, are you trying to do Agile as described by the 17 signatories of the Agile Manifesto? Are you trying to do the small team methodologies? Or are you trying to create greater business agility? And so think about it, right? So you came out of a PMI background. I came out of a PMI background. Yeah. Right. The way that we do software project management, I don't actually think is typically consistent with the Kanban. Like when I think about like how you decompose work and the kinds of things that you would put into a Gantt chart, like you're supposed to put work packages in there. Yeah. These are things that have economic value, right? So when we start to do schedule variance and cost variance, it's like what we're measuring is value created against money spent. Yeah. But the way that gets applied in practice is it's like I always go back to this one really ridiculous story, but I think it's actually pretty consistent. It was one of my first clients when I started leading Agile back in 2010. And there was like this project plan they showed me it was like 400 lines. And like all of the lines were like meetings and deliverables and, different activities. And then there was like a 6-week line item that was like, write the software. I just thought that was really funny, right? Because like everything that added value to what they were doing was a single line item in like a 300, 400 line project plan, right?
Yeah.
And that's where all the risk was. That's where all the uncertainty was. That's where all the need for validation and testing and all that kind of stuff was, right?
Yeah.
And so like if you did a traditional Gantt chart, like imagine your Gantt chart was like epics that were decomposed into features, that were decomposed into user stories, and you Gantt charted out the entire
and decompose the user stories into the tasks needed to create the
solution. For sure, right? And
I've done that.
I've done that too, right? And then you project manage that using earned value and all kinds of things. So it's not Agile per se, right? But it's incremental, it's iterative, it creates the opportunity to inspect and adapt and to learn and to change and to re-baseline things and all those different kinds of things. So I think what you're seeing in that move to get rid of Scrum Masters is a move towards a more pragmatic take on what does agility mean? Yeah. Rather than pure play Agile, pure play Scrum. Because I mean, it's like we work with lots of companies, and I will tell you, incumbent Scrum Masters when we come in are 80% of the time the biggest part of the problem. Because they're advocating for so just think about like where we started the conversation, right? If I'm a Scrum Master who fundamentally doesn't have or doesn't believe that they have agency to actually remove the impediments that are getting in the way of that team performing.
And usually doesn't understand what their job's supposed to be anyway.
Well, like I joke, right? I say this live on stage a lot where it's like if you're a Scrum Master and you don't have agency to change teaming strategies, to align backlogs, to deal with dependencies, to remove organizational impediments, all those different things, right? You don't see it's possible or you don't have the ability to do it. Yeah. What do you retrospect on? And so like I'll joke, it's like the idea that like it's like somehow like the secret sauce to delivering software was having a 15-minute daily stand-up meeting and a retrospective where you say, hey, it was really good that Joe brought the donuts last week. Let's have Joe bring the donuts again this week, right? That was a really big improvement to our team morale, right? And you'll say that as like a joke, but it happens.
But how often does that go back to the structure that you're talking about creating, like the thing that creates the culture?
100% of the time. 100% of the time, right?
So it's not the Scrum Master's fault necessarily.
Well,
maybe partially, but not totally.
It's not Master's fault, but you've got somebody in a situation where they've been given a job that they're not fundamentally qualified to do, nor do they have the agency, the influence, or the insight, or whatever to actually remove the impediments that are material to delivery, right?
It's learning to ice skate on sand, basically.
And they're doing the best they can, right? So in organizations that have adopted Scrum or SAFe but haven't done the transformation work to make it work actually, then what happens is you have all these impotent Scrum Masters running around being difficult. And it's and like I said, it's not helpful and it's not value add. Now, would a Scrum Master in a well-formed team supporting an organization like in its delivery and alignment and all those different, like, would that be a valuable, like 100% it's a valuable role. Yeah. But I think like, just like a lot of organizations aren't getting the value out of Agile and Scrum that they expect, they're also not getting the value out of Scrum Masters that they expect. Yes. And this is the classic thing. It's like, we know that the product owner role has been bastardized for a long time, right? Because there's no ownership in these complex environments. It's just really, they're just like the analyst, right? So we like kind of rebranded in a lot of places our business analysts as product owners, but they can't actually make authoritative decisions around things.
Yeah, like a drive-through.
So again, right, it's an example of people going through the motions.
So but I would say the Scrum Masters also So Scrum Masters don't get the value out of the job either, because it's sort of like they're told, hey, you're going to be able to do this thing, but we're not actually going to ever let you do it. But that's what you're supposed to do.
For sure.
It's disappointing.
It's disappointing. It's frustrating. It probably makes them bitter and jaded. And you see like it manifest as they become very anti-management. They come, but it's like, but again, like I think about like, the journey that we've been on over the last 13 years is leading Agile. And the things that we've had to learn to affect these kinds of organizational changes, right? The level at which we have to get engaged, the value props of the executives that we have to connect to, the clear understanding of what the enterprise operating model looks like, having a credible strategy for how you move from point A to point B. Right. Kind of the second thing that kind of prompted this line of thinking is, I did this, we talked about it just a second ago, but this series of content a week or two ago around SAFe and is it Agile and all that kind of things. Yeah. And this woman on LinkedIn was bantering back and forth with me on some things. And it was just pretty clear that she hadn't experienced what I had experienced. She wasn't wrong in anything she said, but she just hadn't experienced what I had experienced. And it was either that or like her definition of success was really wrong. Like the one thing I think about is because I grew up in Agile in a way where we had to get things done and we had to get things done on time and we had to, be able to vary scope to deliver against time and cost constraints. And there's just, we're business, right? We had external customers we were trying to deliver for and all these different things. And they had expectations. And so we're managing this stuff really aggressively. And it's just like when you've been in the trenches and you realize that these methodologies, they have to enable organizational performance. They have to produce the results that the companies are signing up for. And I really do believe that a lot of people that are playing this space right now, they've redefined success as, are the teams following the rules of Scrum? Are the teams following the rules of SAFe?
Yeah, they're looking at the wrong metrics.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit like back in the day, even in waterfall, right? Where, you put people in functional silos and you run them through Gantt charts and things like that. And everybody starts to lose sight of the value that's being produced. And they go, well, I'm here to write lines of code. I'm here to test things. I'm here to write documentation. And my job is to write the best documentation I can write. Okay. Right. But I don't need the best documentation necessarily. I need the least amount of documentation that's suitable to purpose to enable the customer value that I'm trying to put in market.
Yeah. And that's not gone away. I taught a private recently and that was done. Quality was, I can check the box.
For sure. Right. And so I think that's what starts to happen is when people are systematically disempowered or they can't make the changes that are necessary, then they start to redefine success because everybody wants to feel good about what they do every day. Right. So everybody starts to redefine success as I'm doing the process and that's success. Right. And they start to get detached from, is the process producing the results that we wanted it to produce? And that's why I think you're starting to see a lot of this stuff unwind in certain organizations. And I think it's appropriately unwinding in a lot of places. So, but the thing that I want to anchor on it, and this, I was so floored going back to the original point where we have Agile coaches in this world that like I'm not saying go die on the battlefield. I'm not saying go piss everybody off to the point where you won't be listened to anymore.
Right.
But there has to be a strategy for helping people understand if you want to do Agile, if you want the benefits of this methodology, if you want the performance characteristics of a well-formed Agile team, you have to create these conditions. And we have to create the justification and we have to create the pathways to help organizations get there. Because if we give up on that, then what's the point? Like there's just no business value in doing this.
Well, all right. So I want to ask you a question about the future with all of this in mind. I've been sort of thinking or wondering lately if maybe 5-10 years down the road, nobody talks about a difference between waterfall and Agile. Like the people coming up now, the people that I meet who are really young, they've not worked in waterfall. So there's just tools you use and his Scrum Master / project manager, will there actually be, outside of DSTM, a real Agile project manager? Because at the end of the day, who cares if you're Agile or not, as long as you're creating a humane workspace and delivering value? Does it even matter?
Well, one of the things that I think about a lot with regard to Agile is there's definitely, and I think maybe even we're seeing, I used to ask all the time, like, how long could we be in business? Like, is Agile a thing for 3 years? Is it a 5-year thing? Is it a 10-year thing? Is it whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I can see, like, we still have our phones ring a lot, right? And we've got, and we're picking up new clients, and these are clients you've heard of and like doing cool things. And so there's still room for it, right? So I don't think it's dead in that regard. But what I would guess in 5 or 10 years, like, we might not be able to say the word anymore. The word might be outdated, or maybe it's not like a central thing. Right? We're not doing user groups around it and stuff like that. Like, you don't have object-oriented user groups anymore, right? That kind of thing, right? It's just the way that software gets written. But the idea of organizing around value, the idea of encapsulating teams, the idea of operating in small batches, the idea of putting things in the market faster, it's just happening. Like DevOps revolution, right? Digital transformation, all these different things are happening. It's messy and non-linear trying to get there. So
do you think it's going towards system thinking more, or towards change management more?
That's the absolute underlying part of this. And that's the reason why, if I was doing an Agile project and I said, okay, I'm going to go hire a group and I'm going to put 6 people on it, 10 people, whatever, Scrum Master, product owner, this is how it's going to operate. Inarguable that Scrum would be a superior way of doing that versus waterfall or whatever. Okay. But when you start getting these complex environments that weren't built from the ground up to be product driven or digital or whatever, right? They weren't built in the ground up to do cloud and DevOps and things like that. Yeah. It is absolutely a systems problem. And that's the reason why a Scrum Master in that environment, because they don't have a broad enough view to see how what they do impacts the entire system. Al Shalloway, years ago, he did a post that was very influential on me. And I want to give credit where credit's due, because I got a lot of respect for Al and his thinking. And he said something to the effect of Agile pilots are often very disruptive, because you go and you create all the conditions to do Agile, and then you wrap it in these practices. And then but what happens is that doesn't work in alignment with the rest of the system around it, right? And it's like this little bright spot, but it's actually threatening to everything else.
And everything else reacts accordingly.
Yeah. And so we talk about organizational antibodies and things like that, but that's just a flippant way of saying that we created a local optimization that doesn't work effectively in the context of the broader system.
Yeah.
And so that's what, in the best case in most of these organizations, is what you get a well-formed Agile team that's operating in a very high-performing way, but it's incongruent with the rest of the ecosystem around it. And so it's not like the ecosystem is bad and it shuts it down, but it's like you have this thing that isn't congruent with the rest of the operating model. And so what you have to do on some levels, I've talked about a long time ago, this idea of top-down, bottom-up. So it's like top-down intent, bottom-up implementation. Right? There's really no way to implement Agile in an organization without building teams from the bottom up, right? I mean, the lowest level work surface is team-level Agile. And then as you start to stack, it's like, okay, in the presence of dependencies, okay, we have to have something to orchestrate that. In the presence of scarce resources, we have to have something to adjudicate prioritization. In the presence of corporate initiatives, you have to have something that aligns us with OKRs. And so the tiered systems are what we're attempting to do that. And again, it's like, it gets back to this thing as safe Agile, as scaled Agile. I think in 5 or 10 years, the core principles, the core reference architectural patterns are going to be in place. Like, they're going to be. There's nothing that I can see that is a better way of building products. Like, again, it might emerge, right? Maybe I'll help invent it, right? But it's like, I just don't see it right now. But it has to be a holistic system. There's clients that we're working with right now that we're changing it's not just product development, it's product development and everything around it, how they operationally support things. We had several engagements in the last year that were almost like the IT product development stuff was almost incidental to the overall thing that we were trying to do. Right. But again, it's teaming strategies, it's small batches, it's appropriate metrics. I want
to ask, kind of tie it back to pilots and talk about what you just said to try to stretch it out. So when I started doing pilots back in the day, I thought we're going to spin up these 3 teams. We're going to make them agile. The company will change. And after that period of time was over, I realized that wasn't really the point. The point was we're going to start a thing and see how badly it screws up the rest of the company and figure out what we'd have to do to be able to get this stuff to work. And you're talking about organizational transformation where Agile is maybe a mechanism that helps it get there, but creating that structure that can foster the culture and the development process and all the other things. I mean, that is like a million miles away in maturity from let's send in 3 coaches and spin up 3 pilots.
Yeah, right. So let me see if I can build on what you just said. So maybe 20 years ago, right, in the early days of this, the belief is that you show the organization how this could work and it would like catch fire, right? And then everybody else would want to do it as well, right?
I'll never eat sugar again.
It's it's fascinating, right? Because I think in some ways that's actually proven to be true. Because if you think about it, is there any company right now that isn't trying to do Agile in some form or fashion? Like the stuff that Cundiff did with the Scrum Alliance, the stuff that PMI did around ACP to kind of mainstream Agile, the work of people like Alistair and Jim Highsmith and those guys, the work that you guys have been doing, like everybody's doing it now, right? It's just that like I don't think we've, and again, it gets back into this core thing. I don't think we've fundamentally appreciated the impact of organizational design and governance and all these different things we're going to have, because that stuff is so tightly entrenched, because that's how we financially control our companies, right? That's how we report to Wall Street. And it's like it's a pendulum swing. It's almost like it went too far towards almost like anarchy, right? Teams decide everything. And I think what we're seeing is it's swinging back a little bit. The third thing I talked about in the last video that I just did was a McKinsey article that was talking about, it was in effect, it wasn't titled this, but it like the theme of it was like digital transformation is failing and like, why is it failing? Okay. And it was really fascinating to read, right? Because it's failing for the same reason Agile transformation is failing. It's like, we think it's a mindset, we think it's a belief, we think it's a behavior, we think it's a this, but more often than not, it's a system design problem. And so I've got this blog post in the works that I'm hoping to finalize this week, where I was exploring the idea of like, John Kotter's stuff on leading change. Mm-hmm. And I looked up his 8 steps and I was thinking about it because I read that book 20, 25 years ago, and it was really influential on me at the time. But as I've been in the change business now for the last almost 20 years, 13 with Leading Agile, it's like it's not specific enough, right? So like a guiding coalition of what to do what, leading and lagging indicators, what are we actually going to measure, right? Small wins, like all the different things he talks about, like all of that stuff is true, but it has to be very specifically applied to your domain problem. Yeah. And I think sometimes people read things superficially and they think that like what Kotter's saying is like, we need to get people excited. We need to get them enthused. We need to empower them. We need to like whatever. True. But we also have to give them a path. Yeah. I think about this book.
And then they have to go do the thing.
Yeah. I think this book, I think Chip and Dan Heath, I think it was the, was it Made to Stick? Oh gosh. I don't know. It's the one with the elephant, the rider, and the path. Right. And what they're talking about is that like The metaphor they use, I'm pretty sure it was made to stick.
I'm going to look it up while you talk.
Yeah, look it up. They'll look it up while we're talking, right? But the idea is that it's like the elephant is like, if it's you, it's like your physical carnal desires. If it's an organization, it's like organizational momentum. The rider is like the intellectual thing that wants you to change, right? But the rider only has so much control over the elephant. And at some point, the elephant just does what the elephant does. And then so you have the path, right? Which is like, if you can put the elephant in a path, then the rider can control the elephant and get it going, right? And I think that's what we miss in transformation. And so like leading Agile's transformation model, like we're very attentive to a lot of things, right? So you have to create shared cognition across the organization. You have to get everybody aligned on the values and the principles, the underlying patterns, the underlying success formula, the physics, right? The first principle stuff. And then you have to develop an organizational hypothesis. What is it actually going to look like when we've made the change? Like specifically, right? Specifically, what is it going to look like? And then you have to do pilots. And then you have to prove that your hypothesis is going to work. But the pilots have to be broken down. So we use this technique that we kind of coined a while ago. I'm sure we didn't invent it from scratch, right? But this idea of outcomes-based planning, right? So to get like an expedition to a base camp, we have like 10, 12 different intermediate outcomes, which we can put into a Kanban and kind of flow through the system. We have activities, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get not only our coaches and consultants in alignment with the change agents in the company, all operating on the same page so that they can show up to work and have a very clear idea of what they're doing. But all of those leading indicators result in something that actually changes the performance characteristics of the organization. And so as I read this McKinsey article, I was thinking the same thing, right? Like digital transformation is failing for the same reason Agile transformation is failing. We've had a couple of really interesting opportunities recently, like DevOps and digital transformation are on my mind because we've been in a bunch of rooms recently. And what we're starting to see is that those things are just shades of the same problem. They're basically structure, governance, and metrics problems. They're change management problems. They're systems thinking problems. They're design thinking problems. And again, we live in obviously a market economy where people build software to solve these problems. And so we start to think that buying a tool is going to solve it for us, or sending people to training class is going to solve it for us. And again, in almost every case, it's like it requires a rethink of the organizational design and the operating model. It is you have to have a very thoughtful, specific transformation plan for how you're going to get there.
Right.
And then the changes that you make have to be justified economically, either in cost savings, capitalization, value density, getting things in market faster, charging money for it earlier, right? So it all has to be economically justified. And the days of saying, just trust me, this agile stuff is magic, train everybody and it will all work, right? I think we've just been around that block for a long time. But the fascinating thing is until we recognize the underlying patterns of change and that these rules are somewhat immutable, we're just making the same mistakes with the next rev. You think before Agile, we had Lean Six Sigma, we had critical chain project management, we had all kinds of different things. Now, post Agile, we have digital transformation, enterprise transformation, business transformation, DevOps transformation, right? All shades of the same problem, all failing for the same reasons. And I think it's failure to align around core architectural principles, values, patterns, failure to create an in-state operating model that you believe will work, and then failure of a transformation strategy for how to implement that operating model that has leading and lagging indicators and is that economically justified on the backside. Mm-hmm. So like I said, 90%, 95% of the conversations we have start with, hey, we're trying to adopt Agile. But 95% of what we're talking about has nothing to do with Agile. It has to do with org design and alignment and aligning around value and small batches and, coherence. And I mean, it's fascinating where it's going.
So I want to ask you a question about this.
Yeah.
It's going to take me a second to get to the question though.
That's cool.
Frederick Taylor and Henry Gantt, those guys were solving a specific set of problems that we had in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
They created new problems that when the computer age showed up became like a massive issue. And Agile evolved as a thing that is trying to course correct or be the antidote for the problems created by scientific management applied to work. Mm-hmm. It creates all these new sicknesses. Now we're trying to get everybody to do Agile or to see that whether you call it Agile or not, change the way you work, empower teams, work in small groups, all the things you said. We're at the beginning of an age where artificial intelligence is going to completely transform the work landscape, all new kinds of jobs, all new kinds of problems.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering 50 years from now or 30 years from now, is it going to be the same conversation, but people are going to be talking about how Agile's the thing that, God, how do we get rid of that?
I don't think so, right? Okay, so I'm winging it here a little bit.
Yeah.
Thinking through your question. I would imagine, right? Obviously wasn't around in the early 1900s, but if you think about the classes of problems that we were trying to solve, maybe manufacturing cars, building houses, building bridges, things like that.
Getting people to work harder.
Yeah, that feels like, you're basically, it's a little bit like what Schwaber talks about in, oh gosh, I always forget the name of it, the red, green, yellow, blue book that they read.
I'm going to put that book right here because you talk about it all the time.
I talk about it every third episode. And
I can never find it on my bookshelf.
He talks about predictive process control versus empirical process control. And what I think was happening a lot is I think all of that stuff back in the day was really around predictive process control, right? These were things that were inherently predictable. And what we were trying to do was get efficiency. What I think has changed over the last 100 years is that, it's largely software driven and software can be soft, right? It can change really fast. And then it's also gotten so entwined with the business, right? It becomes the way that the business operates or it enables its operations. And now the pace of business is changing so fast, right? And so the need to put things into market and to get feedback and to inspect and to adapt, I don't see a world where that goes away. I just don't see a world where, and again, I don't mean,
but the pace at which it happens is going to have to increase 50-fold.
Well, so sure, right? And I imagine with AI or whatever, we will figure out ways to go even faster, right? But I'm not trying to be overly dualistic here. There might be something way in the middle, but it's like if we we're not going to go back to waterfall. There's just no world in which big upfront planning is the answer, right? Feeling like we have all the answers and get all the requirements up front, right? There might be a niche for that in some places, right? But I don't see us in mass going back to that.
Right.
So I think some mechanism for inspecting and adapting, rolling wave planning, progressive elaboration, incremental and iterative development, that feels to me like that is an immutable truth. Okay. Whether in 15 or 20 years we think that Scrum is the best way to achieve that, well, who knows, right?
Yeah.
But again, there will be some, all Scrum is okay, let's get together with somebody and let's talk about what we're going to do for the next couple of weeks, and then let's check in with each other, and then let's actually deliver something.
It's not rocket surgery.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not and again, right? I mean, maybe we don't call it Scrum, maybe we don't call it XP, maybe the names or the methodologies change, but I don't fundamentally see the principles changing. It's so if I had to maybe it's just we're in this. I think about this a lot. Maybe we're in a transition state here a little bit, where we have legacy companies that have been around for 100, 150 years. or even companies that, you think about, like there's systems that were built in the early days of computers that are still in production today.
Yeah.
Right. People that built those original systems are still alive.
Yeah.
Like I suspect, and I've contextualized the work that we do at Leading Agile sometimes. It's do we objectively, measurably help companies be more effective? 100%. But if I go up a level and I go like meta, like what are we doing for the industry? I think what we're doing is, we're educating like the next level of leaders, the next generation of leaders that will come in, and just like you said earlier, they've never experienced waterfall. They've never experienced functional silos. They don't have a sense for why you would even ever do that. And at some point, all of us will die or retire or whatever. And then people that have grown up in this will figure out even better ways of doing it.
Yeah.
But it's like, so I can contextualize it as like, sure, let's help the companies be successful that are in place today. But over time, new companies will come that are built from the ground up like this. So to some degree, we're operating on two levels. We're helping the companies that are in place, but we're also educating the next round of leaders that will start their own companies or become CEOs or whatever. And they'll be like, well, this just doesn't make any sense, right? Why would we do it the way that we did it in the 50s or the 60s, right?
Yeah. They'll be looking at the banks like, what the hell were you thinking?
Yeah, like what was going on, right? And they'll lose all historical context. And then at some point we'll just be organizing around value and
TikTok videos.
We don't have dependencies. But the other side of that, which I do think is really interesting, is that I don't know that I think a lot about like if I were teaching, like if I were building curriculums for students, right? I mean this is actually a problem. Like I've been thinking about this idea. I use the word dualistic. I've been thinking this idea of dualism, non-dualism a lot, and I think that our education system really prioritizes for right, wrong, have the right answer, wrong answer, right? Very static, very linear. I think we have to start teaching systems theory. I think we have to start thinking about how do we manage risk? How do we deal with ambiguity? How do we deal with uncertainty? How do we deal with abstraction? Because that's the play, right? It's like I think about on our engagement slide, I tell this to people. It's like, and I used to think about this when I was a project manager back in the day. And I would say like all of the real work happens in between the lines on the Gantt chart. Like the Gantt chart's like a representation. It's like the difference between a map and the terrain, right? It's kind of a map, kind of says like where we're supposed to be.
It's a wrong map. Yeah.
But it doesn't like fully capture all of the different stuff and the conversations and everything that has to be worked out, right? It just doesn't. And I think about that like on our engagements. It's like you have like I'll say like we have a deliverables view. So maybe we've agreed in the contract to produce a certain set of artifacts. Don't like to have to do that, but sometimes we have to do that. And then there's that, right? And then there's the things that we do structurally to run an engagement, outcomes-based plans, expeditions to base camps, executive steering committees, transformational leadership teams, like all the different cadences we do to run an engagement, right? But then there's like the what's really going on, right? There's messiness, right? Because it's all messy. And all of the planning and all those things are just abstractions of the messiness. They're simplifications of the messiness. And so like teaching people how to understand that there's like multiple games being played simultaneously. Yes, we have to produce the deliverables so that the finance and procurement group will pay us. We have to be delivering against the outcomes-based plan because our stakeholders need to see the progress that we're making, and they need to see improvement on assessments over time. Right? But if we're not tracking towards the ultimate performance of the company and the business objectives, then we're going to fail. And if we're not doing all the messy work to manage the stakeholders and the emotions and the fears and the uncertainty and all those things, right? Like sometimes I'll be talking to like one of my consultants on the ground, or, oh, everything's going really great. And then I'll talk to like one of my senior leaders and they're like, well, but there's this problem, that problem, this problem, this. And it's like both are true. It is going really great, but yet there's really concerns going on, right? So it's just messy, right?
Maybe kind of going back to like where we started, maybe the thing is that now the technology is going to give us the ability to look at 3 dimensions of metrics at once, to look at the emotional aspects as well as the change, ability to handle change, as well as all the other stuff we're trying to look at and have been trying to look at for years. Maybe now we're going to have tools that will help us see like the Minority Report version of how these things all fit together.
Yeah, I hope so. Right. My experience with most human beings, and I'll use Scrum as an example, right? Like you go back and you look at like that book I keep referencing that I can never remember the name of.
Switch.
Or
Alistair, the Schwaber book?
Oh, it was Switch. Yeah, Switch, not Made to Stick, Switch. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'll look up the Schwaber book now.
Yeah, the Schwaber book and the early Alistair work, right? There's so much I feel so thankful that I got introduced in the Agile community during the time I did in the early 2000s, because I got to, all those books were being written and published during that time. And you get access to the thinking in real time, and you're part of this early stage movement. And it's exciting, and you just devour all that stuff, and it becomes part of your DNA. But over time, it gets reduced to a set of rules, right?
Agile software development with Scrum. Sorry.
Agile software development Scrum. Yeah, cool. So what Scrum did. So the beauty and the awfulness of the CSM stuff is that it really made these ideas mainstream, captured the imagination of a lot of people, helped a lot of people get jobs, like super positive, all really good. The downside of it is that you have people that are just casually acquainted with the material, and they've reduced it. They've reduced all this richness to a 20-page document that you can get trained on in 2 days.
Yeah.
And I think that was the debate I was having with the woman on LinkedIn. It's like, if her experience with Agile is, I went to SAFe training, I'm an SPC, this is how you do Agile because Dean Leffingwell said so, and this is the prescription, and my definition of success is I know how to run SAFe, then you're like, okay,
good luck with that.
Right? But the reality is that all of these other things have to come together to actually get the benefit of it. And so I don't know. That's just what's noodling around in my head right now, is this idea that, so it's connected to the very first thing I asked you, right? It's sad to me this deep into it that people have given up on the idea that forming the right kinds of Agile teams is possible.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna make it a little bit of a mission this year to, put some content out to really talk about why it's not only possible but absolutely necessary.
And how would be great.
And how do you get there? Yeah, I mean that's probably that. I kind of passingly mentioned the thing with Kimmy. I know you and I are close, so we talk periodically. I know you know that whole story. Probably the rest of the community doesn't know it as much. In 18, my wife got diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia. It went to blast crisis and presented as acute lymphocytic leukemia. Ended up going through a bone marrow transplant. She's 3 years post-transplant and totally awesome. But and so for a long time, what my marketing team was doing was taking just old stuff and just and then repurposing it and trying to keep us in market and everything. But we've been doing a lot of stuff over the last 4 or 5 years that has been really, really game changing. So I'm going to make a commitment to try to get more of that stuff out in market because I think we've kind of cracked the code on how to do it and how to do it safely. And And so I want to get people to believe that again, not only is it possible, but it's absolutely essential if we want to stay in this game. Either that or somebody else is going to take these ideas and turn it into something else and put a whole bunch of different labeling on it and stuff like that. And it will
make $1 million.
Fundamental things, and it'll probably fail for the same fundamental reasons. But it's there is a way. There's a way to do it. We do it, right? I mean, people call us, we do it, and it works every single time. And so So anyway, but I think we have to but the frustrating part is we have to get people to believe it's possible. We have to get people to believe there's a way. And I think we have to get past this notional idea that Agile is just about empowering teams and just letting the teams figure it out. Yeah. There's something that Brian Merrick, is that his name? It was Brian Merrick. And Jeff Sutherland were doing a talk at a Scrum gathering. it was a Scrum gathering you and I were at together. Maybe it was like filled in for a talk you were supposed to do or something like that. It seems like that happened. Okay. But I remember sitting in the room and they said something like, it was a really kind of esoteric content, because Brian Merrick, and I hope I'm not getting his name wrong, was he's like an architect, like an Uber architect guy. And he said something like self-organization was never intended to go outside of class boundaries or something like that. And what he was really saying was that our idea of self-organization was always within the container of the object. It was always within the purview of the team. Self-organization was about letting the team decide how the work got done within the team. I don't think that it was ever like, oh, okay, we're going to self-organize a complex system at scale, or we're going to self-organize refactoring, a complex thing at scale with no design intent or whatever. Yeah. So it's like, yes, I just think we're just in a funny place. It's like where everything is still possible and everything's still out in front of us. But I think the Agile community in some ways has kind of worked its way into a corner.
Yeah, it's in a little bit of a rut.
Stuck in a corner, and we don't think it's possible to change. Then what the fuck are we doing around here? You know what I mean? So
yeah. I think you characterized it really well. I think there is a sort of malaise. People have lost faith in the possibility of change. We need to create that for them again.
Yeah. Cool. But it's possible. So I'm gonna put. We'll talk about it.
You need one of those Ted Lasso believe signs behind you now.
There you go, man. There you go. Okay. Well, awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for having me, man.
Thanks,
I'm
Mike.
heading off to Florida. My wife and I have been married 29 years as of Sunday, so we're going to celebrate that. Cool.
Congratulations. And Kimmy, thank you for your patience with this man.
I tell you, man, it's amazing. Like I've had to grow up over like 30 years, and so she's got the patience of a saint, and she's been an awesome partner, and I'm happy she's healthy. And so we're going to go down to. We're going.
Happy anniversary.
Festival. Thank you. We're going down to a music festival in Fort Lauderdale, and we both like Kenny Chesney. I'm not a huge country fan, but I like Kenny Chesney, and so he's headlining the festival on the third night, and that's actually our anniversary on the 16th. So I'm excited.
Cool.
It's gonna be cool. Yeah, man.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks Dave. Talk to you soon. Then.
Yep.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.